IMHO Talk Show.
Because as per usual, Max and Razor, we take Charlottesville to the world and bring the world to Charlottesville. And so one of the things that we've been talking about, and Max, definitely got to credit you as well, because, like how busy we've been with our guests and whatnot, and we, have our own dialogue. But Max said, who can we bring in here to add some framework, some structure to this conversation, to maybe even like answer some legislative questions. And so, we thought about it, and we, did some reaching out, and I'm, happy to say that this young man obliged. I've actually seen him around, and I was surprised when I actually looked him up and saw the titles that he has and things like that. And so he's been an activist, a Democratic staffer, and a legislative director. And he is known local by folks that are aware of our political candidates and our process. But this is none other than Jason Melendez. Jason, good afternoon to you.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely.
Welcome to the show.
Yes, indeed. So, I mean, like, the world is in an uproar, right? Like, whether good or bad, everybody's trying to figure out.
Confused.
No one knows where to begin at this point.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm supposed to be hosting this show, and I'm lost for words, right? Because regardless of what side of the aisle that you sit on, we know that this is a pivotal moment in history. We know that this is different, right? Some people feel that the change is necessary. Some people feel like that we need something to shake us up. Some people just want to do anything different. They're like, I don't want the status quo candidate anymore. And sometimes you better be careful what you ask for, right? But as we were saying, Jason, as we were coming on air, is that like humankind, right? Like the humanity in us would think that some things shouldn't be non-negotiable in the year 2025, right? Like
you'd imagine
right? Like when we think about like humanitarianism, like just basic human rights. But apparently they are up for debate, apparently. So, I want to hand it over to you because like I got plenty of questions. I know everybody here has plenty of questions when it comes to like what does this piece of legislation mean exactly? Like how does that impact our state and our district? But when you think about the current state of politics right now, like what stands out to you, right? Like sort of how would you sum it up as far as like where we are right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it's been a really long 2 or 3 weeks. I don't even know if we've made the 3-week mark yet. Working in state politics, we're of course very reliant on our relationship with the federal government. And, for decades, states have been able to count on the federal government to be a steady hand and to, provide services like Medicare and Medicaid funding. And we learned last month that perhaps that's not a given anymore when the federal funding pause happened. And we had doctors here in Virginia saying, should I even take patients with Medicaid? Will I get reimbursed for doing this kind of service? We've got community health clinics in Virginia, including some in our region, that are facing pressures because of federal funding pauses. We have individuals from the transgender community impacted, not being able to get gender affirming care in Virginia because of, efforts between our attorney general and the United States federal government. So it's I don't even know where you really begin, honestly, because it's just been such the longest 3 weeks. But I think what stands out the most is the perversion of the federal government in such a way that we've never really seen before, at least not in my lifetime. Because under Republican presidents and Democratic presidents in my lifetime, we've at least had a stable federal government. And it appears that the federal government is no longer willing to play that role.
Now, before we even dig into the issues, Max, and dig into any particular legislation, I want to ask you, Jason, just to touch on and sort of formally introduce yourself when it comes to you as a person, because of course, like your profession, your expertise is one thing, but just you as a man being half Black, half Puerto Rican, right? And you just take a step back and you look at it as just being a citizen, as being a voter. How are these times impacting you?
Yeah, the way I always grew up, I was told to be active and be engaged, get involved. My great-grandfather served in the military. He was a son of Virginia. He was born in Virginia during segregation, during Jim Crow. He served in the military around the time of desegregation, came back to the United States after serving still to segregated domestic policy. So to me, I've always thought about, how can we advance our country in a direction that he would have wanted to see, and he was able to see during the latter end of his lifetime. My concern being now is that we appear to be slipping and turning back the hands of time. And that's why I'm so involved in this work, both my legislative work here at the state level, but also as being vice chair of the Human Rights Commission here in Charlottesville.
And you're apparently a young man, 20s, right?
20 exactly, until next month. So.
Okay, yeah, man, like you've accomplished a lot.
I'll have to come back for my birthday next month.
Okay, yeah, I got a March birthday too. So,
what day is your birthday?
6.
On the 16th, so I'm just 10 days after.
Okay, good stuff. So short, like you're still a young man, and like you've hit the ground running when it comes to being involved politically. But I believe that I'm going to assume that you're a Democrat because of the work that you've done and the folks that you've worked with.
Good assumption.
Okay, good assumption. Okay, but maybe let's start there, Max, because part of what happened in this election, and we're looking for your opinion on this is. A lot of folks are saying that Democrats have become stagnant. Democrats take the Black and minority vote for granted, right? Things of that sort. So what's your rebuttal, to that statement alone of that? It was almost the Democrats' election to lose, not necessarily the Republicans to win.
Yeah, I mean, I think going into this election cycle, it was always going to be a tough election cycle. We had, gotten a new candidate pretty much more than halfway through the cycle, being in July. And of course, we had a great candidate. We had, probably all the money in the world, if you want to look at it that way. But we always do. I think this is going to be a tough election. I think there's some ways the Democratic Party can adapt and learn. We just elected a new chair of the National Party, and we're, potentially looking at, maybe a new state party chair here in Virginia. A number of states have new party chairs as well. I think we'll begin to see a different approach that's more, relatable to working families, and actually prioritizes everyday issues that folks care about that may have flew under the radar a little bit in the 2024 cycle. Or at least some people may have felt that way.
I know one of the things that localities are considering, Charlottesville as well, is how federal funding may impact the budget.
Yes.
What changes they need to make, what changes the locality needs to make, where they need to cut costs and different things like that. And it's kind of, it's a toss up at this point, but people are bracing themselves and trying to prepare as best as possible for anything that may be handed down. Can you kind of elaborate on, I guess, what you can forecast at this point, and what guide is there, if any, that our local government can kind of follow in order to best prepare for what may be coming?
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, it feels like we're flying blind. Even in the General Assembly, it feels like we're flying blind a little bit. I mean, this year, for example, we love to talk about having this $2.2 billion state revenue surplus. But then, a huge chunk of that's going to have to go towards offsetting Medicaid expenses that we have not gotten federal reimbursement for because our rolls have become too extensive, and we have not found a way to actually, consistently and routinely cover that. So if we look at, the fact that, for example, right now we have to put out $600 million to cover our Medicaid expenses just for this biennium, would be at a whole world's trouble if we lost Medicaid reimbursement from the federal government, or it dropped below 90%. We'd be talking about having to lose 600,000, if not more, Virginians off of Medicaid expansion. Immediately, day one impact, they wouldn't have health care. So that's a perfect example of where the state has to start gauging, how do we step in and how do we fix that? Down to the local level, I know we've got a ton of initiatives, some of which you're part of. The Fair Housing Assistance Program that the Human Rights Commission is trying to work on. There's the potential that, we may not get the funding to do that, but we still should have to move forward with that work, because what we know is that there's going to be a huge void in the federal government on the issues that at least our community cares about.
Do you feel that the energy right now in the state is that, is the hope that we're going to swing back to a Democratic governor, will elect, Democratic representatives? Is that sort of the energy, in the state right now? I
would say that's the way it's starting to appear, but we're not taking it for granted. We've got a number of great candidates out there, running across the entire Commonwealth. And I feel very optimistic, but we are still several months away. We've got a primary to get through to nominate our candidates for the rest of the statewide ticket. And we've got a number of down ballot primaries. So it's, we can't say we sealed the deal, but
are we hindered by the two-party system?
In Virginia, it just seems to be baked into the law. And it's going to take some time to unwind that. I do think, I've heard some folks, I think there was a candidate running for the National Democratic Party chair position, who didn't win, thankfully. He hardly even qualified, but he was saying that we needed to, essentially sue third parties and go after them and try and outlaw their access to the ballot. And I just don't believe that's the way to go. I think third parties have begun to pop up, like the Working Families Party, for example, because they feel as though even in large tent parties like the Democratic Party, that we have not been responsive enough. And that means that we have to recalibrate.
I have a question for you.
Thank you.
Will we need so much Medicare if people get out here and get jobs?
Well, Medicare is for old folks. So, yeah, and you pay into it. It's your entitlement. And now, as far as Medicaid, with Medicaid expansion and that being the Affordable Care Act, still, even with folks being employed, there are still going to be folks that are going to be relying on Medicaid. Take Walmart, for example. Walmart being one of the largest Fortune 500 companies has probably more employees than any other major U.S. company that is receiving public assistance. So even if, folks were to go out, everyone who is on Medicaid rolls today were to go out and get a job, which some of them can't because some of them are disabled, some of them are older, it still wouldn't be the root of the issue.
Okay. No, I'm just wondering, as I'm not trying to play devil's advocate or anything, right? But for the older people, that some of this stuff comes down to the decisions and choices that you made younger, right? Now, granted, there are some disabled people that weren't disabled when they were in their working years. And there are some younger people that when COVID came along and free money came along, they figured out how to work the system.
That's true.
So my only knock is, if there's, just because you don't want to run a shovel does not mean that the job does not exist. And you don't have to work for Walmart. You can work for other institutions and organizations. So I'm leery of the way that, I'm just saying, the way that Democrats position people that aren't really able to take care of themselves, or people that say, look, you don't have to do this, I'll go get this for you. People have bought into that, right? So I'm not a Republican by no means, so I don't want you to think I am. But I do understand that there is a problem with the way I see the democratic system working, or has worked, that has created crutches for certain people. And it is starting to perpetuate to the younger generation, and we call that entitlement. But there was also a seed and a root that was planted a long time ago, and it seems to go back to a certain party. So when we talk about the money that's not there and the problems in the system, the local government system, I always go back to where's the root? Where's the root of the problem? So at that point, do we need to tell people, no, y'all need to go out here and get jobs? Well, I don't want to get a job. Well, you can only stay in housing for X amount of years and use it as a stepping stone to go to the next thing. Like, these are things that I don't think that are being said, that I'm not agreeing with either party. I'm just looking at logical sense, right? So I think that we're talking about the symptom.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say, at least it's specific to Virginia. I don't know the Medicaid stats for a number of other states, but I want to hone in on Medicaid because it's so important for two reasons. And I want to bifurcate it into two separate branches. One, you've got the Affordable Care Act Medicaid expansion folks. These are folks who have bought health care through the state exchange. They pay for their health care. They receive an assistance subsidy to make up the difference. Now, if we were to lose the federal reimbursement under 90%, those are the folks who are working and just getting an additional subsidy to make up that extra gap that they can't afford. Those would be folks that would lose their coverage. But then the bigger issue here with the Medicaid is that increasingly, because of Virginia's aging population, a large number of our Medicaid recipients actually are elderly folks who are also receiving Medicare, and they're using Medicaid assistance for nursing homes, because nursing homes in the cost of extended care facilities has become so expensive. And that's actually where a bulk of that trend is going towards, is a lot of that money is ending up in older age brackets, because folks are having to, for example, sell off their assets in order to get into an assisted living facility, and that puts them on the Medicaid rolls to help cover that difference. And that's where these costs are starting to accumulate as Virginia ages.
I think a big thing is people want to see policy reform that doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I think that's what happened with this last presidential election, is that folks get so frustrated by certain policies that, as we talked earlier, Razor, like they may get abused by a certain public, you know what I mean? To where they just say, okay, well, if you're not going to reform it, let's just throw it all out. You know what I mean? And that's not necessarily the answer either, but you could understand how a citizen could get tired of saying, yeah, there's like too much abuse of this system. Like there's too much fat, you know what I mean? Like in these budgets. So, so then they just, so I think there were enough people, maybe the 2%, right? Of that 52% that voted for him, was enough people maybe to just be like, let's just scrap it all. Like, since y'all can't get it right.
Yeah, and I don't know if I could necessarily say that's the correct answer, because I think we're starting to learn the consequences right now. I don't know if anyone really envisioned, that, we should have a federal funding pause 2 weeks into this administration, and, pre-K Head Start funds wouldn't be funded, and Medicaid wouldn't be funded, portals for Social Security, people wouldn't get their disbursements, and I don't think anyone would have envisioned that. So I think we've got to return to a period of stability for the federal government. Even if this administration is going to move forward with large changes, there needs to be a sense of stability because our states depend on it.
Yeah, speak on that real quick before we leave this point, Max. On that right there, talk about, because I've been having this conversation with people too, talk about the budget shortfall. Because there's people who literally feel like, oh no, the states just have their own rights. States, they want us to go back to a confederacy. And some people, I think, really don't get how much money and how much assistance actually happens on the federal level. Like, so just talk a little bit about that, on what that could look like for Virginia if we had zero federal funding.
Yeah, I'll say, for example, the discussion about getting rid of the Department of Education has been brought up again as part of Project 2025 agenda. And, that is one of the largest sources of assistance to states to help run K-12 schools, and then also administer the financial assistance for higher education. So we don't know what that would look like if we just lost the Department of Education today. Where would that money go? Who would administer funding for K-12? Those are questions that no one has the answer to. But yeah, our states do depend on a lot on federal funds. And I was talking to a lawyer recently, a very distinguished lawyer, who practices around the area of state constitutionalism. And we were chatting over how important state legislatures are going to become, particularly these next 4 years, as we think about some of the challenges that we're going to see from the federal government.
And I, of course, can't help but to, again, synthesize this down to the local level and real live people, instead of that 30,000 foot view, because, reduced funding for assisted health care means what? Hospital loses money. Exactly. How do they fill that budget gap? More people dealing with healthcare issues. How does that impact their housing? How does that impact their food security? How does that impact individuals raising families, small children? How does it impact them holding a job?
And it's already hard enough to get by as it is.
The impact of that just goes on, and it's like, I don't know, like a bullet wound through the community, if you will. And then who's responsible? Because a lot of people are going to turn to our local government, impact our schools, right? If schools loses funding, and the schools already request an allocation from the city or expect an allocation from the city to help meet their budget. Whose responsibility is it then going to become, worst case scenario, to fix all of this? I feel like it's going to put a lot of undue stress on our local government. And I don't know where the answer lies. You increase taxes, you make another group unhappy. You cut things. What do you do?
That technical aspect, which I think you're so familiar with, is that also the cities are budgeting on different cycles than the federal government is. So we have to have some sort of certainty in the back of our mind, and at least be able to know what we can expect, or else we're going to have some critical shortfalls in vital areas.
If you feel like you have an unstable, if you will, community now, imagine what that looks like if these current changes or suggestions of changes really take a long-term effect.
And we can't also lose sight that some of these suggested changes are coming from somebody, Elon Musk, who was not elected president of the United States, a billionaire who was not elected to office, or even appointed by Congress to office.
Yeah, that's kind of my point in a lot of this, is that if you look at that inner circle, it's dominated by folks who are catering to wealthy white men. Ultimately, like, that's who is really, is really the beneficiary. But I had a question, and this kind of for Max as well. Do we actually waste enough, though, to where the budget could be corrected? Because that's what some people's plight is in all this. Like, they say there's too much wasteful government spending. So if we stop doing that, then we could get closer to a balanced budget.
Yeah. So, that was actually a question that I have for Jason, is that maybe I just my bias, but is there any good that's potentially could come out of any of these changes?
I don't think he's allowed to answer that.
No, I mean, I don't even know if we have an idea, because, that is also contingent on Congress getting its act together. And the Congress's focus has been more so on revenue rather than spending so far, whereas the executive branch has looked after spending. But Congress is more interested in talking about how we can, limit Social Security, how we can, tweak taxes better for the rich and impact the middle class more. So I don't, the answers are just, it's hard. We don't have the answers, to a lot of these money questions, at least in Virginia. We run a pretty tight budget. I mean, we are pretty tight on rev. We are not a high tax state. As not anyone can say that we are a high tax state, but we are not a high tax state. And I know everyone hates the car tax. It's not everyone's favorite thing to pay. But if we got rid of the car tax today, we wouldn't have money for higher education. Wouldn't have a whole bunch of money for K-12 either. So we are just not a high tax state. And we're gonna have to also rethink for ourselves here in Virginia what that means, because if we know that we don't have support from the federal government, then we're gonna have to start thinking about how we raise revenue.
Exactly. Yeah.
I know we got to go to break real quick, but I have to ask this because this is troubling me listening to these conversations, to be honest with you. Because it's almost like we're looking at the decisions that's being made. But when you start talking about K-12 and the amount of money that it takes to go into the education, why aren't we also looking at the irresponsibility of people having multiple children that they can't take care of? That then, if going off of one of the policies that he was talking about, writing about, moms can't go for tax credits or stuff if they're getting child support. But when I hear people talk about the education, what's needed for the schools, and schools need to send in, and people complaining at the beginning of the school year about having to send extra tissues and having to do this, and my kids only need this and that. But our community tends to have a multitude of kids that they can't take care of, that we're then looking for assistance from taxpayers, government, whoever is responsible for this. And I personally got a problem with that. Right. So if there isn't money for these things, we also have to look at, in my humble opinion, the irresponsibleness of the people having children that they can't take care of.
That's part of that reform.
Yeah. I don't necessarily disagree with you, Reza, but I mean, most of us are just one decision away from having kids that we can't take care of. But the thing is that what's the alternative? Then we
may not have reproductive health care to manage family planning in 4 years from now, potentially.
Or keep your legs closed.
Or think about
do you have kids? Has that worked for you?
8 of them.
So I mean, it didn't work for you. Keeping the legs closed didn't work.
I got
for you.
money,
and that's fine. But tomorrow,
ain't gotta pay taxes.
I know so many folks who live on the streets, whether it's in Charlottesville, where I used to live in Richmond, who had money one day and didn't have money the next.
My parents were like that.
It could be anybody. It just could be anybody. And we have an obligation. That's what government is here for. Government is to assist folks and promote the better welfare of the people. That is government's essential job.
I understand it, but I'm saying, and I'm not targeting any people, but if your kids got 7 different last names throughout the household, you're not making the best decisions. And then at that point, I don't think you should still be walking around at the first of the month with 6 baskets full of food from EBT and getting all these things. That's bad decision making. And I can't give that a pass. I don't care what color a person is. I understand.
I mean, from the social element of it all, I think that makes a whole bunch of sense. But I think from the human aspect, these are still kids that are going to need to be fed.
And what about the kids?
Like, the kids still need to be fed.
That's the problem. As long as we lead with our heart, we'll continue to make bad decisions. Then we'll have people come along with orange hair to tell us how to fix it, and then we'll be left with our drawers down.
But I'm talking about the kids.
I would much prefer to have a live.
You can't blame the kids for adults' mistakes.
What we were talking about, the ICE whole situation, right? Everybody's hollering about, oh, it's a shame what happened to the kids. But if the parents put the kids in a bad situation, what do you do? Like, I don't know what to do. Because like you said, your heartstring pull, you're going to stick kids in these cages. And we start thinking about the horrific things that our communities went through years and years ago, right? And that's different than if you go somewhere, if you're, for lack of a better, and I'm just playing devil's advocate, if you're trespassing in a place that you are not supposed to be, so to speak, by the laws of the land, even though everybody else came the same way, but for whatever reason, you're somewhere where you're not supposed to be, and then you're chastised from it, and then it carries on to your kids. Did the place make it bad for you, or did your decisions, even though you're trying to make a better life for yourself, right? There's a way and a process to do everything. And I think we've gotten it such in a way in the community that in society, I'm saying that we have gotten to where we try to make exceptions and we revert back to the kids. And I think that certain parties have accentuated that. You make your bad decisions, and I'm gonna make it better for you.
Can I rebut that with a question real quick, Jason?
So can I just say? Let me just say real quick. It's just real quick. It's just real quick. Even listen, even though I personally want the elbow raised in the mouth right now, I need people to understand that as hard as it is to hear this type of conversation, it is a conversation that many people are having. Okay, it is necessary, and we do have to talk through this thing. Because ultimately there's people out there trying to make decisions for you in your life. That's I just want to preface the rest of the conversation with that. That's all.
But I like how Razor said, I'm not targeting anybody, and then he hit the bullseye.
Right.
That's what I like about that. But Razor, simple question to me to sum it up before we go to break. And we'll come back and talk more with Jason to close out the show. But if a child goes to school with no money, does that child deserve to starve?
You ask me?
Yeah.
Hand me that microphone. If a child go to school with no money, does that child deserve to have to starve?
Yes. Straight. That's a straight question. Simple as I can make.
No.
Okay.
No. But
that's my whole point.
But let me say this though. As many nonprofit organizations as we have around here that draw up money for kids, right? That's where I believe the problem is starting at, is because we don't monitor these people. If you're a nonprofit organization getting food for the people that need it, you shouldn't be riding around a 2025 Tesla. You're not doing anything. So I think that the structure of these organizations is as crooked as the mob itself, right? So if the money that's taken in, all these little jars, all this, do you want to round up to give money to if these people were actually accounting for the money that's being there, we'd have enough. You know what I'm saying? So we tend to I think we look in the wrong direction. Trying to fix this problem, we shouldn't all be looking all the way up to Capitol Hill, right? When we have all these things going on right here. I think that there's as crooked as any drug dealer sitting on a corner with a pistol shooting up the community at nighttime. They just do it in a Brooks Brothers suit with a smile on their face.
I get what you're implying. But I got to say, that's just not true, though. There's not enough organizations here to feed all the kids that actually need it in school. If you think about it that way, like people underestimate how much we actually get from tax dollars. Like there's not enough organizations that would really be able to replace taxes.
I don't believe
we're going
that.
to leave the same standard.
I seriously do not believe that, because if you take let's say the facilities that they rent out, the buildings that they have, right? And you take that monthly rent, most everything there is done digitally, right? Nobody's sitting around counting stacks of cash no more. So the money that you spend on rent and the staffing that's inside there, you're telling me if that money was actually used for what its intended purpose was, not to be dispersed just because I got a title that we couldn't take care, I don't believe that.
You can take care of some, but I'm just saying, like I don't believe that would answer like the wide.
How many kids do you think needs money? How many kids do you need money?
I mean, I don't know that stuff.
No, I'm just saying, just if we were to look at it from that point of view, it wouldn't take much.
I know how I can answer that, though.
Yeah,
I do know that it seems like more and more schools are considered qualifiers for free and reduced lunch. So that tells me then that we have a wide issue and we have wide disparaging income gaps to where majority of schools qualify for free and reduced lunch, which to me means that like I don't know if then an organization that may pay its executive board or whatever could suffice that, because that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people.
And all that means to me is that the schools have turned themselves into a business. Because if you look at the economic growth of every community, it's based off of the school. And the school is based off of what's coming in there. So if a school can spend $8, $9, $10, $15 million to expand, you mean to tell me that whole time before they decided to do that, they couldn't feed the kids? I don't believe that.
I got you.
That's like the government paying $15,000 for a toilet. You know, all the things that we used to hear that they used to do. It makes no sense to me.
I mean, here, I think the money aspect of that, a lot of our Virginia school systems are relying on bonds
Yes.
to build. It's not money that they had.
And
it's money that they are
it's
having
in
to raise.
response to influx or growth in the population in the community.
It's not always hard liquid
right.
cash that we can just throw out. So a lot of times we have to raise revenue, especially at the local level. With state government, we don't do a ton of that. But the local level, bonds is the way to get by. And we have to choose when we can strategically get bonds for lower interest rate periods and make that difference up. So it is a complex equation. Budgeting is not easy, especially for local government.
Ooh, okay. We are joined by legislative director, amongst many other things, activist, staffer, Jason Melendez. Man, this is a great.
You good, Jason? Though you'll stay for the last 15 minutes.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
For a while. Me and you had to get up under the desk. But we're gonna take a quick break. We'll be right back. More with Jason.
I to the ism, H to the Izzo talk show. Back like we never left.
We are
for the people, and this is good. This is good stuff. I want to ask Jason a question. I don't know if I want to put him on the spot or just wait till after the show, but I hope you'll come back. Like maybe regularly. I think this is good.
I'm only down the street.
All right, that's what's up. Is that okay with you, Ms. Matt?
That's perfectly fine.
I think this conversation has been very fruitful and very, very transparent and authentic. And that's what we do. That's what we do here. So Jason, as we close out the show with you for today, it's a couple things that we definitely want to make sure that we touch on, and that's big conversation within the community. But as we lead up, to the DEI and just the treatment of marginalized people, let's say, for that, like a couple other things, like I want to be a little positive. I'm gonna pull a razor.
Did you hear that, Razor?
I am.
That might mean you can't be part of this conversation.
I'm actually gonna pull a razor, and I'm actually gonna tell y'all some things that I think Trump actually is doing okay with.
Okay.
I personally don't mind declassifying documents. And now here is one that's going to lead into DEI conversation. People have made it a bullet point about banning biological males from competing in women's sports.
Yes.
Like that's a big thing. I personally feel like that makes sense. Because think about it, even if you are somebody who feels like that your gender is determined at the point of birth, how the doctor labeled you, right? If you believe that, then that means you also believe that males are genetically, physically more dominant. That's why you have men's sports and you have women's sports. So I don't see how that's offensive personally. And I get everybody has their own opinion, but I don't see how that's offensive if somebody's biologically, quote unquote, a male. Why it wouldn't be fair for them to compete in women's sports. So there's a couple of things. I want all the Trumpers to know, that I'm not all doom and gloom. But so I give you two things that I'm all right with.
Well, what's your response, Jason? I see you.
I'll say on the biological male. First we'll start with the executive order because it's impossible to mention that topic without mentioning the two executive orders. Okay. I think the federal government, especially, and I don't think any level of government has any business legislating around sports. I can think to very few circumstances where, at least in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we have legislation around sports. That's usually a decision left up to associations.
Yes.
And while I see no issue with it, and I think I'll even go ahead and quote Donald Trump from 2015, where he said that, there hasn't been issues with trans folks existing in spaces. So that was him in 2015. I think a lot has happened between the last decade, but that was him in an interview in 2015 talking about North Carolina when they were looking at the bathroom bills. Obviously a lot has changed in 2025 since one of his first executive orders was going after that community in specific. And I think that, that has been a constant concern I've heard, at least from locals here in Charlottesville. So, and that executive order is impacting, of course, UVA and VCU medical centers as well. So, we've got to probably get out of that realm of legislating in that area. We just don't need to be.
Agreed.
I seem to remember a boxing match where Razor, you're not in this conversation. You're supposed to be positive. But
where you're talking about the Olympics match?
I believe so.
Although we know that she was actually a woman.
Yeah, she was a woman.
To my understanding, actually, what we know is I think Russia had been putting pressure on the International Committee behind boxing to try and say that she was a man, even though she wasn't. In fact, she's actually a pretty conservative woman. So I could only imagine what she would have had gone through going back home, accused of having transitioned when her family would have been against it. But it appears to have been manufactured right out of the Kremlin. And it made its way to conservative prime time, which is more concerning.
Okay, we believe you, Jason. Go ahead, Charles.
Although she did beat the hell out of herself.
Indeed, she did.
And that raised the question. Hey, but
must be a man.
but before we let you go, Max, Razor's supposed to say that.
I'm sorry.
All right, yeah, but DEI. Let's talk about all things DEI. Jason, well, I mean, I kind of know, but I want your take on it. Because there's always these like lightning rod dog whistles that Trumpers love to use, and one being right now is DEI. Somehow this thing, right, like this entity that has the potential and has the intent and has actually, in fact, proven to benefit so many different sectors of population. Talking about different races benefit from it.
Some of their own.
Exactly.
Governor Abbott can use his wheelchair to access the state capitol in Texas because of diversity, equity, inclusion.
There you go. So maybe you can talk about it from being a staffer. Like, what is that mind trick? Like, what is that Jedi mind trick that made people attach DEI to lifting Black people up and gays up, and it keeps white people down?
Not a clue. I don't know if I could maybe we have to draw it back to the whole white replacement theory, which I think something Charlottesville had unfortunately become familiar with what happened in 2017. I think there's just a huge element of racism behind it, and that's just the admitted truth of the matter. I mean, pulling down the history on the Tuskegee Airmen from the Department of the Air Force website, chastising Department of Education staff for doing, training that was recommended actually during the first Trump administration. This is just, it's gotten to be out of hand. And I think one of the most upsetting parts of it, we'll go back to last year in March when the Key Bridge collapsed in Baltimore. It wasn't even 24 hours that we had Republican elected officials saying that it was due to DEI and that the Biden administration was incompetent because of DEI. We hadn't even.
How about the recent plane crash?
Yeah, the plane crash. We haven't found all the bodies out of the water in the harbor in Baltimore by the time folks were levying that allegation. The plane crash, up in Northern Virginia, same thing. I mean, it is just I don't know. It's their go-to term for everything they dislike, I guess.
Yeah, sort of like how it was woke.
Yeah, it was woke before,
but became a bad thing.
Woke got too tired. So.
right. Yeah, but you said it perfectly. It is racism. Like that's the only thing that I can like boil it back to, because what would make a woman want to vote against her own health rights? Like, what would make a Latina want to vote for being deported? Like, I literally heard on WNRN, not WNRN.
NPR.
Yeah, NPR. Sorry, NPR the other day. Like, there was a group and there was a rally of illegal immigrants, like lobbying for Trump, and was literally saying things like, oh no, like he's good for the country, and I just hope that I don't get deported. I'm like, what? Like, that's just some logic.
And I think they believe that.
And the thoughts and prayers isn't enough there.
I say you voted for it.
Thoughts and prayers is not going to be enough there because I think ICE has, really started already.
Yeah. And so, speaking of ICE, break that down for us. Like, what reign do they have? Because you're hearing about sanctuary places, and you're hearing about them being not let into places. So what's the rules around that? I mean, because I guess technically they have been given like sort of free reign to go where they want to go, right?
Yeah, they've got marching orders from the executive branch to carry out immigration enforcement, but one of the things that they don't often carry with them is a judicially signed warrant. So in many circumstances, they actually can't detain somebody. And if folks know their rights, they know that they can't usually be detained by ICE unless a U.S. judge, has signed that warrant. Usually these administrative warrants are signed in the name of the Secretary of the Homeland Security, who does not have that judicial power to detain somebody. It used to be that ICE couldn't go into schools and churches, places you probably wouldn't want them to be. I think you should be able to go to worship without worrying that you're going to be picked up by ICE while worshiping, or you should be able to go to school without worrying about being detained.
But it's happening.
It's happening now. Even Puerto Ricans apparently are being asked about their documents upon arrival to the United States, as if they're not already U.S. citizens. So, and I know there's been talk about visits from ICE and Customs and Border Patrol in the Charlottesville area and in Stanton and Waynesboro. I'm glad that the school divisions, both the city and the county, have said, we're not going to allow them in because they don't have a right to inspect student records under FERPA. I mean, they just don't have that right unless they come back with a judicially signed warrant.
So do you have any insight as far as what's actually happening to the people that are being detained? Are they being deported? Are they being taken to jail? Are they being placed in some type of camp?
I mean, I think we're really working off the headlines. I haven't heard much about at least Virginia specific. I know folks, I have mentioned ICE visiting places to inspect documents, but I haven't heard quite what's happening in terms of detention. I know there's been talk about reopening Guantanamo Bay for the use of detention of migrants, which is a unique take, to say the least, because I thought we were always about trying to close down Guantanamo Bay. But and then I think, I know at least locally here, our regional jail will report you to ICE if you are picked up and held in pretrial detention in most circumstances. At least if you interact with city police or county police and it stops there, they won't report you to ICE. But I think ACRJ, if you go to ACRJ, I believe that that board has made that determination some time back that they will report. So though I think Charlottesville could call it a sanctuary city. If you go to jail and you're held in pretrial detention or you're found guilty of a class 1 misdemeanor that warrants you to get extended detention, there is a chance that you probably will be reported to ICE.
What do we do with the slave catcher? Like during that time, like history repeats itself, seasons go around. So it's almost like what we saw happen when, like you were a free slave and then you had the slave catchers that went around and just started. It's the same thing, right? They just shortened the name. Yeah. What do we do to stop it then is what it's going to take to stop it now.
Well, I think one of the best things that folks can do right now is, now that we've all got phones in our pockets, keep a screenshot on your phone of your rights. If you know that you're potentially going to be targeted by ICE or your documentation status is in question, even if you own a green card or you have some sort of temporary status here, because temporary status can be revoked. Keep a card with your rights on it. Keep contact information for an attorney. And then just remember, if ICE comes to you and they come with administrative warrant inspected, make sure that if it's not signed by a judge, then you don't have anything you don't have to comply either.
And he's just so unpresidential. Trump is that's what gets me. It's like how Rudy is in press conferences when you got people, you had a mass casualty that we haven't seen in decades. Yeah. It's like people think that this is like who should represent them. To me, it just shows that
well, even to the outside world too, with the tariffs and everything, that image that the tariff shows, putting tariffs on our Canadian and Mexican allies and putting tariffs on China. Now, China, I'm a little bit more sympathetic to that cause, putting the tariffs on China, but putting the tariffs on Mexico and Canada, two nations that we share borders with and have a free trade agreement with, is going to raise prices on our common goods. We haven't quite seen it yet on the avocados for Super Bowl Sunday, but if you're going to be making dip, maybe next year you might see it.
But the eggs are up.
The eggs are certainly up. Yeah. They won't tell you about that though. They won't tell you that the eggs are almost 2 times the price they were when Joe Biden left office just last month. So the tariffs is going to be a really detrimental thing. I think he's going to learn it really quickly that he's going to have to walk that back. It's going to impact Virginia farmers because retaliatory tariffs hurt Virginia farmers. It's going to impact port workers, the Port of Virginia down in Hampton Roads, because they're going to see less traffic. And it's going to impact, home builders in Virginia who need lumber from Canada to build the homes that we need in the Charlottesville area to bring down housing prices. So we're going to see those tariffs hit every corner of our life.
But Jason, it doesn't matter. You just have to be rich and wealthy. Don't you get it?
Well, I wish I got it. I wish I was in that boat, but I think we all wish we were in that boat, but I'm not in that boat. So, I'm thinking about what's going to happen if Canada hits back with retaliatory tariffs and said, we're going to charge you for, energy.
But there's been talks about that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we rely on our shared energy grid with Canada. So energy prices could go up. Your Dominion bill could go up. Yeah. So folks need to buckle up. It's going to be a long ride. It's 4 years.
Well, that's what I was going to say. What do we do, Jason?
We buckle up.
Buckle up.
And hopefully Jesus will take the wheel. Say so. I've been calling him, but he hasn't come down just yet. But
and guess what? He ain't coming back. It's on us. He already died for us.
That's true.
It's on us now to get it straight. But Jason, hopefully, man, we may have to make this regular. I don't know how regular.
I'd be more than happy to come back. Absolutely. You know how to get in contact with me.
Absolutely.